Throughout history, one issue bankrupted more empires than any battlefield defeat ever could. It wasn't about battle tactics, bravery, or even great leaders, it was money. Specifically, keeping soldiers paid. Empires crumbled not from losing fights, but from running out of cash to pay their troops. The moment paychecks stopped making sense, loyalty disappeared quicker than any patriotic speech could inspire. Welcome to where wealth, influence, and the past intersect, where nothing works the way it seems on the surface. Long before modern banking, income tax systems, or national treasuries existed, every great civilization wrestled with one nightmare question. How do you keep hundreds of thousands of armed soldiers fed, supplied, and faithful year after year? Warriors don't fight for ideas alone. They fight expecting rewards and return safety for their loved ones, respect, property, or straight-up payment. Once armies evolved from part-time militias into full-time professional forces, warfare transformed into a massive payroll challenge. When treasuries emptied, no emergency lender existed to bail them out. This forced every empire to tie its military strength to tangible resources, precious metals mined from mountains, territories seized through violence, or work squeezed from subjugated peoples. These weren't theoretical systems. They determined how entire societies functioned, who carried the weight, and who suffered when everything fell apart. Rome grasped this reality better than anyone and took it to extremes. During its peak, the Roman Empire kept approximately 400,000 soldiers stationed across 3 continents. This wasn't just a military, it was a permanent institution. Every legionary anticipated consistent wages, retirement packages, and frequently, farmland after completing service. This wasn't generous charity. It was the price tag for holding the empire together. Rome's frontiers didn't stay secure through nationalism. They stayed secure because soldiers received reliable compensation initially anyway. The foundation of Roman military compensation was silver, not verbal agreements, not documents, actual metal currency. The denarius, Rome's primary silver coin, powered the imperial machine. Troops received payment in denarii. Tax collections happened in denarii. Commerce revolved around them. Roman governmental legitimacy was physically pressed into every coin's face. But silver doesn't materialize from nowhere. Rome required enormous amounts, and this need secretly drove the empire's territorial growth. Conquering Hispania, modern-day Spain, wasn't merely about glory or strategic advantage. It was about controlling some of the most productive silver deposits anywhere on Earth. These mining operations didn't just make Rome wealthy, they'd bankrolled its legions. The empire literally excavated its military might from underground. While silver supplies remained strong, everything functioned smoothly. Soldiers believed in their compensation. Business owners accepted Roman currency. Tax collection operated efficiently. The military maintained order, safeguarded trade networks, and guaranteed silver continuously cycled back to government coffers. It created a self-sustaining cycle of authority, wealth, and military force, but natural resources have boundaries. Eventually, Rome hit those limits. By the 2nd century, easily accessible silver deposits were exhausted. Extracting or became increasingly expensive. Military operations demanded more funding. Imperial borders stretched faster than tax revenues could support them. Rather than addressing the fundamental issue, Roman authorities embraced history's oldest financial trick. They cheapened the currency. The denarius appeared unchanged externally. Identical stamp, same authority. But gradually, discreetly, actual silver content decreased. A bit of copper mixed in. Additional alloys added. On official records, soldiers still earned identical amounts. In actual purchasing power, their earnings were shrinking. Initially, nobody caught on, then prices began climbing. Merchants required more coins for identical products. Soldiers protested that wages no longer met basic expenses. So authorities increased salaries using more degraded coins, which drove prices even higher, which necessitated greater taxation, which crushed farmers and city workers who couldn't negotiate better income. Inflation didn't appear as an obvious disaster. It sneaked in through minor adjustments, each seemingly reasonable, each seemingly unavoidable. Combined, they gutted the entire system. The Roman military adjusted faster than ordinary citizens. Soldiers started demanding bonus payments. Emperors who couldn't deliver got overthrown, sometimes through violence, by those who could pay. Allegiance transferred from the state to whoever controlled the money supply. Military power stopped protecting Rome. Rome started serving its military instead. Meanwhile, the people actually bearing the cost had zero voice. Farmers faced harsher taxation. Commerce became unpredictable. Savings became worthless, and faith in currency disappeared. What started as a clever solution to limited resources became a gradual wealth transfer from everyday people to the armed government. Here's the twisted irony. Rome didn't collapse because it abandoned silver. It collapsed because it depended on it too heavily. When metal supplies dried up, the illusion of strength shattered with it. By the 3rd century, the denarius contained almost entirely copper. Soldiers stopped receiving actual money altogether, instead getting food supplies and land promises. The economy splintered, confidence vanished. The empire that once dominated the Mediterranean with silver-stamped coins began disintegrating under its own salary obligations. If financial delusion were an Olympic sport, Roman officials would still hold records, but Rome wasn't special. It was simply first, and the pattern it exposed would replay throughout history in different variations across different empires with identical results. Once you comprehend how an empire funds its military, you understand who really controls everything. And once that funding system begins breaking down, collapse becomes inevitable, only the timing remains uncertain. When Rome's silver-dependent model started failing, it didn't create innovative alternatives. It reverted to something more ancient, more violent, and far less reliable: territory, pillaging, and commitments of future rewards. In doing so, it exposed a lesson every empire eventually learns painfully. If you cannot compensate your army with currency, you compensate it with conquest. And conquest never continues forever. Long before Rome confronted this dilemma, other empires had already constructed complete military systems around it. The Assyrian Empire exemplified this early and clearly. Its forces terrified the ancient Near East, not only for their capability, but for their function. Assyrian warriors weren't primarily compensated with regular wages. They were compensated through conquest itself. Stolen treasure, captured prisoners, and seized land served as payment. Cities that fought back weren't just defeated. They were looted, depopulated, and restructured to sustain the Assyrian military apparatus. This wasn't random brutality. It was economic architecture. The Assyrian government didn't require a sophisticated monetary framework because warfare self-funded. Each victorious campaign restocked the army, rewarded faithful service, and strengthened the fear that simplified future conquests. Violence wasn't a side effect of this system. It was the entire system. But there was a problem. When territorial expansion slowed, the incentive structure collapsed. Warriors expecting rewards through conquest had no tolerance for limitation. And when the empire couldn't sustain its army through victories anymore, it got devoured by uprisings, fragmentation, and internal breakdown. This same principle emerged centuries afterward in the early Islamic caliphates, though in much more organized fashion. There, soldiers received government stipends financed by taxes extracted from conquered regions. Property taxes, commercial fees, and religiously mandated contributions flowed to central authorities, where they got redistributed to military elites. As long as the empire expanded, income increased. As long as income increased, soldiers stayed loyal. But when frontiers stabilized and conquests ended, the system strained. Administrative expenses rose, tax pressure intensified, and the political unity that expansion once concealed started fracturing. Growth wasn't merely encouraged, it was mandatory. Meanwhile, thousands of miles eastward, China was developing a completely different approach, one depending less on currency and more on systematic organization. Under the Han Dynasty, the government maintained enormous armies without depending exclusively on coins. Instead, it mobilized society itself. Taxes got paid not just in money but in grain, fabric, and physical labor. Peasants were obligated to perform periods of compulsory work constructing roads, stocking storage facilities, transporting supplies, and supporting military logistics. Soldiers ate directly from government-managed reserves. Military campaigns got planned around supply networks rather than treasure vaults. The system was effective, centralized, and remarkably durable, but it extracted a human price that rarely shows up in glorious historical accounts. Entire populations existed under constant obligation to support an army they never join and defend a border they never witness. It functioned because the government possessed the administrative capability to enforce it. When that capability weakened, the system fell apart just as certainly as Rome's silver economy did. And then there were empires that compensated their armies not with currency, territory, or grain, but with human beings. The Aztec Empire had no permanent salaried military in the contemporary sense. Warriors fought for rank, prestige, and the privilege to collect tribute. Defeated cities got forced to deliver food, textiles, raw resources, and captives on rigid schedules. These payments sustained the capital and rewarded the military class enforcing the system. This wasn't disorder, it was methodical. Tribute records were carefully documented. Military campaigns got organized to maintain fear and obedience rather than territorial growth. The army operated as both enforcement and tax collection. But this system was fragile, and when tribute payments stopped arriving, the political framework collapsed almost immediately. The empire possessed no financial cushion, no reserve capacity, no method to adjust when extraction failed. Different civilizations, different methods, identical underlying reality. Armies never get paid in theory. They get paid with something concrete: metal, territory, labor, or human lives. And whatever that something is ends up determining the entire society supporting it. This is where history starts feeling disturbingly relevant. Modern nations like to think they've solved this challenge. Today, militaries get funded through budgets, government bonds, and accounting systems. Salaries transfer electronically. Equipment gets financed through extended contracts. Wars get funded through deficit spending instead of plunder. But remove the modern terminology, and the fundamental structure hasn't transformed nearly as much as we assume. Military expenditure remains politically untouchable. When budgets get tight, social programs face scrutiny. Defense spending stays protected. Inflation still silently transfers the burden of that spending onto regular people. National debt replaces tribute collection, central banks replace silver mines, and the weight still lands on citizens who never approved the system controlling them. The mechanisms evolved. The underlying logic remained unchanged. Inflation today operates identically to coin debasement in Rome. It lets governments meet financial obligations without openly increasing taxes. It transfers purchasing power away from savers and workers, and it disproportionately shields those nearest to money creation. Nothing screams stable system like requiring invisible mechanisms to finance the most visible force on the planet. The most dangerous myth isn't that history repeats itself. It's believing we've evolved beyond it. Empires don't collapse because they lose battles. They collapse because the systems funding military force become unsustainable. When maintaining power costs more than society can handle, collapse doesn't happen in one moment. It happens through gradual decay. Trust erodes first, then stability, then social cohesion. This is why grasping economic history isn't pointless trivia, it's financial survival knowledge. Because if you don't understand how money flows toward power, if you can't identify who gets paid first when systems break down, and if you don't recognize inflation, debt, and extraction for what they truly are, then history doesn't need to repeat itself. It just keeps moving forward and you'll experience the fallout without ever understanding the cause. If this shifted your perspective, subscribe now. History holds the answers. I'll reveal exactly where to find them.